There is a letter with your name on it. Not your legal name, not the name your parents gave you, the name that only God knows. The name written before you took your first breath, before the world had any say in who you would become. And tonight, that letter has found you. I know how that sounds. I know you have heard promises before, beautiful words that dissolved the moment real life pressed back in. So I'm not asking you to believe anything yet. I'm only asking you to stay, just for a moment. Because what is about to be said was never meant for everyone. It was meant for the one who has been quietly carrying something too heavy to name. That might be you. Think about the last few months. Not the surface version you share with people when they ask how you're doing. The real version, the one that lives in the space between 3 in the morning and 4, when the house is silent and your mind will not let you rest. The version where you have smiled at the right times, said the right things, kept moving, kept functioning, but deep inside, something has been aching in a way you cannot fully explain. You have been wondering if any of it matters, if you matter. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, persistently, like a question that never fully leaves. That question is not weakness. That question is a door. There was a man many generations ago who lived in a city that had forgotten to be honest, not corrupt in obvious ways. The corruption was quieter than that. It lived in the way people looked past each other, the way truth had become something inconvenient, the way children were growing up learning to perform instead of feel. This man was not a king. He had no title that would impress anyone. He owned a small piece of land, a modest home, a life that from the outside appeared completely ordinary. But he had something rare. He listened. Not to the noise of the crowd, not to the voices that told him what to want or who to be. He listened to something older than all of that, a stillness, a presence, something he could not see but could not deny. And in that listening, he began to understand things about people, about pain, about the invisible threads that connect every human soul to something far greater than this short, complicated life. One evening, he found a child sitting alone outside the city gates, not crying, just still, the kind of still that comes after a person has run out of tears. The man sat beside her without saying a word. He did not offer answers. He did not pretend the pain was not real. He simply stayed. And in that staying, something shifted. Not fixed, not erased, just shifted, like a weight being shared without explanation. The child looked at him and asked a question that would follow him for the rest of his life. She said, "How did you know I was here?" And he told her the truth. He said he did not know. He said something had simply guided his feet in this direction, and he had learned long ago not to argue with that. He had learned to follow the pull. Years later, this man would describe that night as the beginning of everything that mattered in his life. Not a grand moment, not a miracle anyone else could verify, just a quiet evening, a child in pain, and a man who listened to something beyond himself. You are being asked to do the same thing right now. Not to perform faith, not to announce anything publicly, just to consider the possibility that your being here in this exact moment, watching these exact words, is not an accident. That the ache you have been carrying has been seen, that the question you have been afraid to ask out loud has already been heard. There is a reason you clicked. There is a reason something in you said not yet when you considered closing this. That reason is not random. It is not algorithm. It is not coincidence. It is the same force that guided a quiet man's feet toward a child sitting alone in the dark. And what that force placed in his hands that night, what was written inside it, what it meant for him, for the city, and for everyone who came after, that is where this story is only just beginning.
He never told anyone what was written inside it. Not his wife, not his closest friend, not the elders he had known since childhood. For 7 years, he carried what he had learned the way a person carries something sacred, something so fragile that speaking it too soon might shatter it before the world was ready to receive it. But secrets of that magnitude do not stay silent forever. They find their way out, not through words, through a life. People began to notice things about him. Small things at first, the way arguments seemed to soften when he entered a room, the way strangers would open up to him within minutes of meeting, sharing things they had never told anyone, as if something in his presence gave them permission to be honest. The way children followed him through the market, not because he performed tricks or told grand stories, but because he looked at them fully, like they were the most important thing in his field of vision. His neighbor, a woman named Surah, had spent 11 years in a marriage that had hollowed her out. She had stopped hoping for anything different. She had made peace, or what she told herself was peace, with a life that felt like a waiting room. One afternoon, she passed him on the road, and he stopped and said something so simple, so ordinary, that she almost dismissed it. He said, "You have not been forgotten." That was all. 5 words. She stood on that road for a long time after he walked away, not because the words were magic, because they were true. Because somewhere beneath all the resignation she had buried herself under, some part of her still needed to hear it. And somehow this man she barely knew had looked at her and seen that part. She went home and wept for 3 hours. She later said it was the first time in 11 years she had wept from something other than grief. Word travels in small cities. It travels faster than truth and slower than rumor. And so the stories about this man began to accumulate, layered on top of each other, some accurate, some distorted, some turned into something almost mythological by the time they reached the outer edges of the city. People who had never met him had opinions about him. Some were drawn, some were threatened, some dismissed him entirely as a man who had simply learned a few comforting things to say. But the ones who actually sat with him, the ones who stayed long enough to move past the surface, they all described the same experience. They said it felt like being known, not judged, not evaluated, not measured against some invisible standard of worthiness, just known, completely, without flinching, as if every part of them, the beautiful and the broken, the proud and the ashamed, had been placed on a table in full light and met with something that looked remarkably like love. One night, a merchant arrived at his door, a man of considerable wealth and considerably more pride. He had traveled from 3 cities over, not because he believed in anything this quiet man represented, but because his daughter was disappearing. Not physically. She was there every morning at the table, every evening at dinner, but her eyes had gone somewhere else. She had stopped speaking about the future. She had stopped speaking about much of anything. And he was terrified in the way only a parent can be terrified, a terror so large and so helpless it makes the strongest person feel like a child standing in a storm. He knocked on the door, expecting answers. He had money. He was accustomed to answers being available to those with enough money. What he found instead was a man who poured him tea and asked him one question, not about the daughter, about him. When was the last time you told her that her soul mattered more to you than everything you have built? The merchant sat with that question for a very long time. The tea grew cold, the night deepened around them, and something in this powerful, proud, accomplished man began to crack open. Not collapse, crack open, the way a seed cracks before it becomes something alive. He wept in a stranger's home for the first time in his adult life. And when he finally gathered himself and looked up, the man across from him said something that has echoed across every retelling of that night. He said, "The letter was never just for you." The merchant did not understand. He asked, "What letter?" The man smiled in that quiet way of his and said, "The one that brought you here tonight, the one that has been following you your whole life, waiting for you to stop running long enough to receive it. The merchant returned home before dawn. What happened between him and his daughter in the days that followed changed both of them in ways that cannot be reduced to a simple before and after. But the daughter's eyes came back, slowly, like light returning to a room where the curtains have finally been pulled open. And she asked her father one evening what had changed in him. He told her about the quiet man, about the question, about weeping in a stranger's house over cold tea. And she asked the same question the child at the city gates had asked years before. She said, "How did he know?" Her father shook his head slowly. He said he had been asking himself that since the moment he walked out the door. But there was an answer. There was always an answer. And it lived inside the thing the man had been carrying for 7 years, the thing he had never shown anyone, the thing he had found in the hands of a child sitting alone outside a city that had forgotten to be honest. The letter. And what was written in it was about to become impossible to keep silent any longer.
The night he finally spoke, no one had asked him to. There was no crowd gathered in anticipation, no announcement, no stage, just a small fire outside the city's oldest well, a handful of people who had stopped to rest on their way somewhere else, and a sky so clear and full of stars, it felt like the universe itself had leaned in to listen. He began the way he always did, quietly, without ceremony. He said, "I want to tell you something I have carried for a long time, not because I am ready, but because I have finally understood that it was never mine to keep." The people around the fire grew still. There's a particular kind of silence that falls when someone is about to say something real, not performed, not rehearsed, real. The kind of silence that feels like held breath, like the moment before rain. This was that silence. He reached into the worn leather satchel beside him and removed something wrapped in cloth. He placed it on his knee and did not unwrap it immediately. He looked at the fire for a long moment, and then he began to speak. He said, "When I was a young man, I believed the truth was something you found, like a stone on a path, something fixed and external and waiting to be picked up. But I have lived long enough now to understand that truth is not found, it is recognized. It is recognized because it matches something already living inside you, something that was placed there before you had any say in the matter, before the world started its work of telling you who to be and what to fear and how much of yourself to hide." One of the travelers by the fire, a young woman who had been watching him with open skepticism, asked him what he meant. He looked at her directly and said, "When was the last time you did something that made your whole body feel honest?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the fire. He did not wait for an answer. He said, "That feeling, that specific feeling of total honesty, that is not you. That is the signal. That is the thing inside you that remembers where it came from and recognizes truth when it is close." He unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside was a book, small, ancient-looking, bound in dark leather worn smooth by years of handling, a gold seal pressed into the cover, a tree at the center of the seal, roots running as deep as the branches reached high. He opened it to a page near the middle. He said, "I am not going to read you what is written here, because what is written here is not the point. The point is what I understood when I first read it. And what I understood is this. Every single human soul alive on this earth right now is in the middle of a test. Not a test designed to humiliate or to trap, a test designed to reveal, to bring out what is already there. The way heat reveals the true nature of metal, the way pressure reveals what stone is made of." He paused. He said, "Most of us spend our lives trying to pass the test without knowing what is being tested. We measure ourselves by what we accumulate, what we achieve, what others say about us. We perform contentment and call it peace, and all the while the actual test is sitting quietly beneath all of that noise, patient in the way that only eternal things can afford to be patient, waiting for us to stop performing long enough to ask the real question. The skeptical young woman spoke again. She said, "And what is the real question?" He looked at her and smiled, not with satisfaction, with recognition, as if he had been waiting for exactly her to ask exactly that. He said, "The real question is not, what do I want? The real question is, what was I made for?" The fire cracked and shifted. Sparks rose and dissolved into the dark above them. He continued. He said, "I found this book because a child led me to it. She did not know she was leading me anywhere. She was simply sitting in pain, and I was simply following something I have never been able to fully name. And when she placed this in my hands without knowing what it was, when I opened it that first time alone in the dark, I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected to feel enlightened, elevated. I expected revelation to feel like power. What it actually felt like was smaller." He held up 2 fingers close together. He said, "It felt like this much space opening between me and everything I had believed about myself. Just this much, just enough space to see that almost everything I had built my identity around was borrowed from a culture that was itself borrowing from fear. And in that small space, in that almost nothing of a gap, I felt something I had not felt since childhood." He lowered his hand. He said, "I felt like I was being seen, not by another person, not by any force I could put a comfortable human shape on, by something vast and precise at the same time, something that knew the number of times I had almost given up, something that had counted my silences the way a loving parent counts a sleeping child's breaths." The travelers were completely still now, even the ones who had arrived with the particular armor of modern skepticism, the crossed arms, the carefully maintained expressions of detached amusement. Even they had gone quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that happens when something lands in a place too deep for defense. He closed the book gently. He said, "I carried this for 7 years because I did not feel worthy to share it. And then I realized that worthiness was the wrong category entirely. The question was never whether I was worthy. The question was whether I was willing." He looked around the fire slowly, meeting each set of eyes. He said, "The letter I told you about, the one that has been following each of you, it is not made of paper. It cannot be held in 2 hands, but it is real. More real than anything you have touched today, and it contains something specific, something written with your exact circumstances in mind, your exact wounds, your exact capacity for something greater than the life you have settled for." He stood slowly, the book tucked under his arm. He said, "I am going to tell you what it says." And then, from the edge of the darkness beyond the firelight, a sound. Footsteps. More than one person, moving with the specific kind of urgency that does not come from curiosity. The young woman stood instinctively. She looked at the man. She said, "Who knows you are here?" He did not answer immediately. He looked toward the darkness, and the expression on his face was not fear. It was something far more complicated than fear. It was the look of a man who knew this moment was coming and had spent years deciding what he would do when it arrived.
He did not run. That was the first thing everyone remembered afterward. In every retelling, that one detail never changed. He stood at the edge of the firelight, the book pressed against his chest, and he waited. The way a man waits when he has finally stopped being afraid of the thing he always feared. 3 men emerged from the darkness, officials, the kind who carry authority like a weapon. The lead man pointed at the book and said, "That does not belong to you." He replied with a steadiness that silenced everyone around the fire. He said, "Nothing I have ever been given belongs to me. That is precisely the point." They took the book. They told him his gatherings were finished. They used the language that power always uses when it feels threatened by truth. Words about order, about disruption, about danger. He let them speak. He let them take what they came for, and when they turned to leave, he said one thing. He said, "You can carry it home, but you cannot carry what it opened." They left without responding. The fire had burned lower. No one spoke for a long time. It was the young woman, the skeptic, who finally broke the silence. She asked him if he was afraid of what came next. He sat back down and said something none of them would ever forget. He said, "I spent most of my life afraid of the wrong things, afraid of failure, of disapproval, of being too much or not enough. And all of that fear kept me so busy, I nearly missed the only question that actually matters." She asked, "What is the question?" He looked at her steadily. He said, "Does the one who made me know that I tried to live honestly? That is all. Not did I succeed perfectly, not did I impress anyone, just did I try with what I was given in the time I had." He pressed one hand flat against the earth. He said, "You were made by something that does not make mistakes. You were placed here on purpose. The pain you have carried is not evidence that you were forgotten. It is evidence that you are being shaped. And the fact that something in you is still listening, still searching, still refusing to give up despite every reason to do so, that is not weakness. That is the letter. That is who you actually are beneath everything the world has added." He stood. He looked at each face around the dying fire. He said, "Go home, not to the building where you sleep. Go home to the truth of what you are. Ask the question honestly, in the quiet, without performance, and then listen. Not for thunder, not for anything dramatic. Listen for the small, precise, personal answer that has been waiting your entire life for you to be still enough to receive it." He walked into the dark. No one followed, not because they did not want to, but because every person at that fire understood in the wordless way that real things are understood, that what he had given them was not a direction to follow. It was a door to walk through alone. And every one of them would remember that night as the moment something shifted, not fixed, not solved, shifted, the way a key shifts in a lock, the way a life turns toward the light it was always meant to find. You were not meant to find this by accident. The question is, what you do with it now.